Well, just before we start recording, Dr. Jones, I want to say thank you. You've been a tremendous influence in my life. Um, I used to kind of be kind of like a roosh, you know, like a smooth operator,
Yeah.
traveling all over the place. But you brought me back to Mother Church, and I'm married now, and I have a son. So,
Well, congratulations.
yeah, I've been ever since I came across the Goey's Guide to World History. I actually was on to you before you were cool, like before everybody knew you. So I like to brag about it. I was very early Michael
That
Jones.
is early. That is early on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so before we start, I'd like to say a prayer in Spanish, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Okay. Oh Señor Jesucristo, único Hijo de Dios, tú dijiste con tus labios puros, sin mí no podrás hacer nada. Oh Señor, en nuestra fe asumimos tus palabras. Me arrodillo ante tu benevolencia. Ayúdame, un pecador, para completar a través de ti este trabajo que voy a embarcar. En el nombre del Padre, el Hijo y el Espíritu Santo. Amén. Amen. Well, welcome, Dr. Jones. Hello, everybody. This is Noel OG del Rancho. You're on the Pocho Hour today, and we have a special guest, Dr. Michael Jones. In my opinion, the most important scholar and commentator of our times. Dr. Jones is well known for having been fired from a Catholic women's university for being against abortion during a time of feminist upheaval. He went on to start Fidelity Press and Culture Wars magazine. Some of his best-known books are Slaughter of Cities, Barren Metal, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation as a Form of Political Control, and his latest book, Logos Rising. Dr. Jones, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, as I said to you off camera, I'd like to recognize that you've been a tremendous positive influence in my life, helped me get back to God, even though, you know, I was raised culturally Catholic. We weren't really practicing Catholics at all. But initially, I actually tried to argue against your points. I tried my best for about a year to say, you know, this guy's wrong on one way or another, because essentially, you know, the programming has always been anti-religious in this society. But at a certain point, I had to be honest with myself, and I said, I can't refute what he's presenting. And during the course of that year, you know, God obviously worked different ways to kind of get to me and help me turn my life around. And as I had mentioned to you, I'm married now and I have a son, and I'm very grateful to God for that.
That's great. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with me. You made my day.
I'm glad, Dr. Jones.
Tell me just where you grew up, though.
So I grew up in Los Angeles, California. My parents are Nicaraguan. My dad actually was born here. So, you know, it's kind of odd to find a Nicaraguan born here so far back, but he was raised in Nicaragua as well. My mom came here basically during the Contra War. When things got so bad, she came out here. Luckily, you know, she had a brother who lived here. And that's where I came from. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, specifically around Inglewood, California. Yeah, and that's kind of my story. I mean, luckily my mom was really good at giving me, I guess, a sense of. Hi, Dr. Jones, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, I was just telling Mike, anytime someone says something nice about me, the camera breaks.
I think they're on to us, Dr. Jones. I don't know. That was really weird. That has never, ever happened. Where were we? What was the last?
You were talking about your parents came from Nicaragua and you're growing up in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Something happened. Wait a minute. Something happened to your voice now.
Okay, testing right here. Can you hear me?
All right, that popped back. Was that
Okay.
you or? All right, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, everything good on you can hear me well now?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Great. Yeah. So, my parents, my dad was actually born here, but he's of Nicaraguan background as well. As a little boy, he went back to Nicaragua and pretty much spent his childhood and his adolescence there. Then he came back here as an adult. My mom came here during the Contra War, basically, when Nicaragua was facing embargoes and a bunch of clandestine activity, thanks to Uncle Sam. She basically fled the country, met my dad, and out I came. Right. My mom was very much a product of kind of the Sandinista revolution, even though she's not in support of Daniel Ortega today. You know, she was very much of that generation which, I take it you were also a part of that generation as well. And again, I wasn't really raised Catholic culturally, of course. And, we went to Easter mass or something like that once in a while, but I didn't really grow up with religion as a factor in my life.
Yes. Yes. Immigration always disrupts people's lives. It's always disruptive. There's no way to get around it. Right.
Well, one of the things that my mom did that I do give her credit for is that she gave me a strong sense of, I guess, looking back, of an ethnic identity. She really, kind of kept the literature around our house, gave us a sense of history, our language. And ever since I was 4, I've been traveling to Nicaragua basically every summer. As a kid, I would spend it back home with grandparents and aunts and uncles on family farms. And so I really got to be exposed to that world as well. And, throughout my life, I've lived there, odd for 6 months to a year at a time, depending, kind of where work leads me.
This was fundamentally different than the European migration.
Yeah.
Because when my grandparents came over, you never went back.
You never went back. Yeah.
I mean, it was dangerous to cross the ocean. It was a big deal. And you came over here and that was that. Whereas the people from Mexico or Central America, they can drive back down.
Yeah. It would take a 4 or 6 hour flight.
And in this regard, it's a little bit like the Roman Empire, the end of the Roman Empire with the Goths, except that it's not the Danube. It's the Rio Grande, you know what I mean? But basically the whole principle of assimilation in the Roman Empire was you get a guy come over, a few people come over. If they came over from Germany, you send them to Syria. You send them as far away as you could from where they came from. Because at that point, they have to become Romans. They have to learn Latin because they're isolated and that's the only culture they have at that point. Right. So, but when the Goths, they all crossed the Danube River at the same time. And so they had the Gothic kingdom, and that was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. So you're seeing something similar now in California.
I think so. Yeah, I think you're seeing it across the Southwest to various degrees. Could even be argued Miami, the southern tip of Florida, you can see that phenomenon as well.
Right. I was in Los Angeles in the 90s giving talks. And at that point, the Mexican TV channel, local TV channel would come to me. And I'd say, look, the crucial issue here is whether you can preserve your Catholic identity, because that is your ethnic identity in America. Yeah, that's the triple melting pot. I tried to explain the triple melting pot, and I said that is going to be under assault. It's clear, and here it was. You could see like billboards there, something like hip hop, Noah's hip hop, or something like that. Where what's hip hop got to do with Mexicans? What's that got to do with Nicaragua? Yeah. So you're trying to turn the Mexicans into Negroes as a way of assimilating them, pick up that gangbanger culture.
Right.
Which was in itself a manifestation of migration in America, except that it was inside America. The blacks from Mississippi would go to Chicago and they take the blues up there and they create this kind of gang culture in Chicago. It's still there. It's still there. It hasn't gone away after 50, 60 years. So I said, and at that point, I don't know whether they understood what I'm saying. So I have Hispanic relatives. I mean, not immediate, not close, but I mean, relatives who, joined the Prosperity Church because they left Mexico, and Mexico, that was Catholicism back there. I'm going to join the Prosperity Church because God really wants me to have that BMW. That's what the preacher told me. And I want to have that BMW too. So God and I are on the same wavelength, anyway.
No, that's absolutely true. And it touches on what I wanted to at some point jump into here, but we might as well touch on it. Essentially, what I think you're 100% on point. You saw it coming in the 90s, and now it's metastasized and become real obvious. During that same time frame, you had the increasing of the Protestantization of Latin America. Many countries in Central America, Brazil, even Mexico, though not as great, you've had the rising of Protestant sects arise. But even within the Catholic Church, it's like the values have also kind of become Protestantized, unfortunately. And here is, it's very interesting where I find myself now in front of the camera having a conversation with you. It really kind of all hinders and comes together around last year, because you hit the nail right on the head when you said that they're trying to kind of Africanize Hispanics. But the phenomenon works two ways. The dialectic works two ways, because in the United States, you're either black or you're white, and Hispanics aren't either. So we kind of are like the third position in the racial dialectics of this country. And so we see a phenomenon that I call the Latinxers, which is the Hispanics who like are SJW. They tend to be, kind of into racial or identity politics, etc. And then you have what I call the pick-me's, which are Hispanics that try to be white, right, in the traditional American sense, who kind of want to let go of their Hispanicity and adopt kind of more of an Anglo worldview. You can call it a Protestant worldview. And so we reject both, right? We don't want to fit into the pick-me category or the Latinxer category. We want to affirm our heritage and our roots. Overwhelmingly, we're all mestizos, right? We have a Spanish paternal line and an indigenous maternal line, and we celebrate both. We don't want to lose our identity. But what happened last year is that you saw how Hispanics kind of threw a wrench in the upheavals that were going on. You saw Hispanics as a kind of preserving force. So when they were trying to take down statues in New Mexico of a Mexican conquistador, it was a Mexican guy who shot a white Antifa guy who tried to hit him with a skateboard. What you saw in South Chicago, the Mexican and the Puerto Rican gangs like established order in their neighborhoods and didn't let the black rioters come in.
Right.
You saw the same phenomenon in Portland with another young Hispanic guy. Hispanics really try to kind of stay away from the fray. Obviously, there was people who were involved. But overall, I think Hispanics showed themselves as not willing to take a knee because they don't suffer from white guilt.
No.
And at the same time, to us, it seems like there was a domestic dispute, right? Like America's like a biracial couple. It's a black woman and a white man. They're our neighbors and they're fighting amongst each other again. And what came out in 2020 was that like we shouldn't get involved. This is a problem between them. We shouldn't choose a side. If anything, we should try to placate. Hopefully there is intentions, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to be sucked into the fray because it's not our problem. We obviously do have some African admixture. It depends on the region you're from in Latin America, but our racial ethnogenesis, if you want to call that, worked out the opposite of how it worked out in the Anglo world. And it's because of our Catholicism. So this kind of rise in a Hispanic identity or reaffirming a Hispanic identity, reaffirming our Hispanic roots goes hand in hand with what you're seeing amongst young men of my generation is kind of going back to church, seeing how the Catholic Church and the Christ-centric worldview of old Europe is what allowed this, what we call mestizaje, right? This mixture of these different groups within a very specific matrix and culture that, I believe was for the glory of God. Unlike what you have today, which is kind of a promotion of kind of a degenerate race mixing where there is no concept of God in the middle of it. There is no concept of logos. It's more just kind of licentiousness and kind of letting go of your lust.
Yes.
So that actually kind of introduces us or kind of my audience to you, Dr. Jones.
Yes. As I said, in many instances, the big issue right now is identity theft. This is what happened in St. Louis, another statue battle, where the organizer of the attempt to take down the statue identified these people, his opponents, as white, not only white, but white supremacists.
Right.
And then it turns out, well, when you look at them, they're all praying the rosary. Well, do white supremacists pray the rosary? No, it's Catholics. So they had to deprive them of their identity. And white now means bad. So as soon as you're white, you lose the battle. And that was a strategy. I entered into it. And I said, no, this is a Catholic-Jewish battle. And at that point, it blew the whole thing up.
Mm.
The whole thing got blown up. The statue's still there. He didn't know what to say. I had a debate with him. I entered it when he challenged me to a debate. The same thing is happening across the board. So I just have, by the way, I wanted to say that the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit is coming out in the Spanish edition.
Oh, wow.
It'll be out in Argentina very soon. It's at the printer right now. And I'll send you the link. You can contact the guy in Argentina who will can tell you about the details.
Great. Yeah,
or you can contact me. So I'm the other thing is happening is that two of my books, Libido Dominandi, Degenerate Monitors, have been translated into Portuguese. So they're making the rounds in Brazil now. So what you see in all of these instances is identity theft. So in Brazil, you've got this constant pendulum swinging back and forth between socialism and capitalism, which are basically two Anglo ideologies. These ideologies come from England, and Catholics are always being pressured to adopt one or the other of these false identities. The same thing happened here. It's no different here. The ethnic group, there's no way to get around assimilation. If you move here, you're going to assimilate. You just have to. The fact that you speak perfect English is a sign that you've assimilated. You know, that will go. And then we're just talking about you now. When your children grow up, that's going to be a completely different situation. You know, and at that point, the only thing that's going to provide cohesiveness for your life is religion. And that is proven historically. So that people, no matter where they come from here, they end up in being Protestants, Catholics, or Jews. And now there are more Muslims, so that's going to figure into the whole thing. Yeah. This is the identity that you have in America. You don't have another identity. That's it. What you have as an option are false identities.
Right.
Identity politics. So, you know, I stopped going to church. That means I'm white, which is bad. I know. I'll become a homosexual, which is what Pete Buttigieg did, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. I mean, I'm not denying, I don't want to cast aspersions on him. I'm sure he is a real homosexual, but the point is there was an identity politics part of this thing too. Right. Because if he didn't come out as a homosexual, what would he be? He'd be a white guy from a town in Indiana. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere now. And everyone who comes here is, in a sense, pressured to succeed. And you're always pressured to succeed on their terms, the terms of the people who are in power. It's always been the pressure. And the classic example in this regard was the Irish and the Germans. The Irish wanted to assimilate much more avidly than the Germans did. The Germans wanted to have their own culture. Germans wanted to be off by themselves, just leave us alone. The Irish wanted to get into politics, move up, that type of thing. That was the classic. So I know this because I'm half Irish and half German. So I have multiple personality disorder as a result of that. But the fact that I am what I am is partially because I'm third generation.
Right.
And the intermarriage takes place at a certain point. So your son will be third generation. And he will, when he gets married, he'll probably marry within the Catholic group because of your faith, because that's his identity. If he doesn't have an identity, well, he doesn't have an identity. But if he has an identity, the only identity that's available to you in America is that ethnic identity, identifying with your religion.
Right. Well, you know, I think Hispanics, you kind of touched on this, where there's an interesting dynamic to Hispanics, and Samuel Huntington kind of covered this, you know, back in like early 2004.
Right.
Where, you know, and you touched on it, we have the ability to kind of go back to the fountains of our identity and kind of replenish our buckets.
Right.
Unlike the Italians and the Irish and the Germans, who had the ocean in the middle of
right.
Of their
and no airplanes when that happened.
And no airplanes, exactly. So it's kind of an interesting moment. And you know, if you look at the demographics of Hispanics, not just in Hispanic America, but including in the U.S., we're overwhelmingly a young population. We're in our mid-20s, whereas your average white American is in his 50s. So, you know, you have a lot of these things kind of coming in at the same time. And, you know, I think it's kind of up for, you know, who knows what exactly the future is going to develop into. As far as, my son, and this is kind of where all the Hispanic young men or my audience goes all over Latin America and the US as well. Is that we're finding ourselves at this kind of family formation stage. And I really encourage the young guys to kind of stop, messing around, wasting their lives and their money and their time and their energy. And they should invest it in a family.
Absolutely.
That's something that I'm 32 years old. It took me a while to do that. But if I can help a younger brother kind of start that cycle a little bit sooner in life, then, I feel like my wasted resources won't be so wasted. They would have been for something.
That is the crucial issue right now with this generation. I'm talking from 20 to 30. This is the time when you have to meet someone and form a family. This is the time that it happens. And if you waste your time with pornography, and then you got student loan debt, you're in a bad situation. I mean, I guess I'm one of the few people who will address that situation, because most people they won't even talk about it. It's your fault. It's your problem. You're lazy or something like that. No, it was a trap. And it's always been a trap in one way or the other, but it was really a vicious trap for this generation, because they grew up with pornography on their cell phones and that type of thing. This type of access was a vicious attack on the people to prevent them from forming families, which is your only protection in this world. I mean, naturally. Obviously, there's God and his grace will protect you, but he created the family as the vehicle of your protection, not just you and your children. Right. That's why it's there, and that's why they're trying to break it up and turn these people into robots, individual sexual robots.
And you see how really they focus in on fertility rates. I mean, in Africa, you can see that there's a lot of nefarious things going on around, the V word, or, women's rights or girls' education. This is how the NGOs sell it. But really, the aim is to push down fertility rates. And you saw this happen in Latin America. We went from, 5 or 6, 30, 40 years ago to we're just barely above replacement rate. Some countries are actually significantly below replacement rate, but overall we're kind of at the cusp. So really the millennial and Zoomer generation finds themselves, do we want to go the way of the Irish, the Germans, and the Italians who... And one of the things that I point out is what I call like kind of alchemy. There's a tradition of kind of this Anglo alchemy where it's like, you sold your soul for riches type of thing. It's kind of what we as Hispanics see what happened to the Irish and the Italians and the Germans when they became white. They went from having an ethnic identity to having this, vague color, quote unquote, racial identity.
Right. What is a white guy? A white guy is a Protestant who doesn't go to church anymore.
Yeah,
I've stated this repeatedly. When you lose your religion, you lose your identity.
Right.
And when you lose your identity, they put an identity on you.
Yeah, you become.
That's exactly what happens. So I keep trying to tell these white guys, I keep trying to say, look, I'm not white, okay? I'm biracial. Right. I'm Irish and German. That's not my identity. You're trying to put this identity on me and it doesn't fit. And on top of that, I'm not going to put it on myself. I'm not stupid. I understand what happened in Charlottesville, okay, where you show up and you're going to show them, and we white guys, they marched into the cannons and they all got slaughtered. They walked into a trap without any understanding of what was going on. But now we're smarter. We're smarter now than we were then.
And they're trying very hard to racial, because you see, the Hispanic identity is an ethnic identity. It's not a racial identity. There might be some racial component to it, but it's more of an ethnicity. But they're trying very hard to racialize us down there and here. You have the rise of this identity called Afro-Latino, which is basically, these triracial mulattoes being forced into the American racial dialectics. Or you see the rise of kind of this indigenous identity where you have these Indians with green eyes and dirty blonde hair. All of a sudden, they're Aztecs and Mayans. And, part of what's been the process for us is that we've been forced to go through our history, our 500 years of history, right? 300 years as part of the Spanish Empire, 200 years as these republics. And in that kind of process of self-discovery, you see how the Black legend was used, not just by, Spain's competitors, whether it be the English or the French or the Dutch, but by our own quote unquote criollo elites who kind of fomented these independence movements because they had a vested interest in making the previous regime look bad in order to legitimize their new establishment. And so, and you've seen this movement kind of happen throughout Latin America. It's been happening for decades, really, mostly in academia, but now it's starting to come into the popular culture where people are really discovering all these lies that we were told about the Spanish Empire. You know, the impression of the Inquisitor coming to torture you, of how the Indians were slaughtered and raped en masse. And it really leads to this kind of, ethnic schizophrenia or psychosis that Hispanics suffer from, where we essentially believe that we descend from rapists and rape victims.
Yes.
So we have this weird chip on our shoulders where we can't seem to harmonize both our Spanish identity and our native identity. And for me, this all worked out together when me kind of coming back to Christ and realizing that in a way, Christ, by being fully God and fully man, is something of a spiritual mestizo, right? In his hypostasis, there's no dialectical tension between, him and being God.
Right. That's right. I came to this realization when I was in Mexico. I was in Guadalajara. It was kind of strange because we're celebrating a guy down there who wrote a biography of Hitler and thought Hitler should have won World War II. And so, okay, I think I'm in with Nazis here, but then at the end of every talk, they all stand up and say, "Viva Cristo Rey." Yeah. So wait a minute. No, we're not Nazis. We're Cristeros. And Cristeros were fighting against the Masonic tyranny that had been imposed on Mexico by the Anglosphere.
Yes.
So what's going? I'm puzzled. So I just go to church, and I'm sitting there in church, and there's the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I suddenly realized this is what created the Mexican nation. This is what created this nation. It was an act of God. It was like the supernatural intervention into this world here, and this lady, the Queen of Heaven, looks like a mestiza.
Yeah.
Because this is the destiny of the Mexican people. It was this merger, this merger in love of Spaniards and Indians.
Yeah.
They come together in a way that it created an entire Mexican race, and they're living in harmony until this Masonic hegemony gets imposed on them. And then the rulers suddenly don't identify with their own people.
Yeah.
This is exactly the position we're in right now. You got a whole world where the government is at war with its own people, and they have their allegiance is not to the people that represent, but to some oligarch somewhere who's paying their bills. That's why this kind of Mexican Masonic experience is so important.
Yeah, and the roots of that come from the independence movements. These guys, Simón Bolívar's and the like, they were influenced by the French and the Anglo fashions of the time. They saw what the French did, they saw what the Americans did, and they wanted a piece of the pie.
That's right.
And in that, we threw away, in a sense, our preeminence. The Spanish Empire was the preeminent power financially, economically, culturally, militarily for 300 years, much longer, 100 years longer than what we've existed as these republics. And so it's like we're coming to terms with that reality. And, so many things are tied into it, kind of the Anglo ideology, liberalism, seeing how Masonry played a role, anti-Catholicism, the Black legend, sexual degeneration as a form of political control. All these things are tied in together as men of my generation are coming to age and saying, again, do we want to go the way that happened to these people who lost their ethnic identity and now, are either, bowing the knee to, I guess, African Americans for crimes their ancestors didn't even commit because they weren't English. Or do we want to preserve that which God granted us? In the example of La Virgen de Guadalupe, coming into the new Spain, right? I mean, it was the new Spain. It was Spain 2.0 was and Mexico City was the center of the empire de facto. I mean, when you look at the galleon trade, everything in from the east went through Mexico before going to Europe.
Right.
And,
The English knew that too.
yeah, absolutely.
That's why they had pirates like Sir Francis Drake show up there, and become looters and pirates.
That's
exactly. They have had a predatory influence on the Catholic sphere ever since the war between England and Spain over who was going to rule the world.
Sure.
There's a good movie I saw on Bolivar, and Bolivar is leading one revolution after another, and there's always an Englishman in the background. And so he's always helping them out. And finally, Bolivar takes over Colombia or Venezuela or one of these places. The Englishman said, "This is great. We're glad you did this. We'd like to ask you for a favor. We want to create a bank." And suddenly Bolivar goes, "Oh, wait a minute. I'm not sure I like this idea." And then the Englishman pursues it. And then finally, no, Bolivar says, no bank. Well, guess what? Now the Englishman is giving weapons to the other side and they're fighting Bolivar.
Yep.
This is the type of, it happened over and over and over again. And these people are ignorant of their own past. We could have had an alternative to capitalism,
yes,
and slavery,
yes,
if the Jesuit experiments in Paraguay, the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay had been allowed to succeed and then to spread. They did succeed. There's no question that they did succeed.
Right.
Within a generation, they had those, the Guarani were making musical instruments after having been savages in the forest and spending all their time getting drunk.
Right.
This was an enormous step forward, and they were profiting from the work of their own hands. And the Freemasons entered it and destroyed it. It was the Marquis de Pombal, the Portuguese minister. And these were all people who had been baptized Catholic, but had gone over to the dark side through Freemasonry. Now, these people, who knows this? Who knows this now? I mean, this is why I wrote Baron Metal, because there's a whole chapter in Baron Metal on that story. But the point is, so flash forward, I'm in Argentina, I'm in Buenos Aires, and there's a statue, a kind of tribute to the Hispanic heritage of Argentina, and it's conquistadors and it's Franciscans. And they got their hands cut off, which is kind of like a Masonic attack on the heritage.
Oh, wow.
And then you flash forward, and there are the church. It's probably still up on YouTube, bare-breasted women.
Yes.
Charging the cathedral, wherever it was, Buenos Aires, I think it was another. But anyway, you can see it. What got into these women? What happened here? What was the vehicle here? How do you get? And then you got these women cheering in Argentina because they struck down their abortion law. What got into these women? It was sexual liberation. This goes all the way back to the basic understanding that the Greeks had, that Euripides had in the Bacchae. As soon as the women leave their looms, the city's going to fall. And how do you get the women to leave their looms? By infecting them with sexual liberation, birth control, abortion, corrupting their morals, and then turning them into proxy warriors for the agenda that's going to enslave them. This is not just South America. Exactly the same thing happened in Ireland. Ireland, a Catholic country, and there you have women cheering because they have the right to kill their children. What happened here? It was sexual subversion. That's the thin end of the wedge. That's how they get in. That's how they destroy your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, this generation, the millennials and the Zoomers, of Hispanic background in the United States, it's like we're slowly kind of coming to terms with this reality. And, thanking God that I feel like it's not too late. We can turn it around. We can, obviously in the cities of Argentina and in Mexico, Chile, and Colombia, you're seeing these upheavals, but there's still countries that are, fighting back against feminism or LGBT. And, but the reality is that the United States government, it's a matter of policy. The State Department, the embassies down there are pushing these movements. There's NGOs.
That's right.
who are hiring people to go and create some kind of a black identity out of Nicaraguans who happen to have, an African admixture, where, in Latin America, we don't have a racial identity. We believe we're all the same race.
I want to cut to the chase here. I don't think anybody has a racial identity.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. I'm going to, on Saturday, I'm going to be giving the keynote address for a conference in Nairobi. I was in Nairobi 2 years ago, and I was in Nairobi 17 years ago. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that Africans are not black, because black is an ideology every bit as much as white is an ideology.
Absolutely.
So if I'm not white, and they're not black. And what is the thing that allows us to talk? What is this thing that allows us Mzungu to talk to these people? It's Catholicism. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
There are nuns there, heroic nuns, who are living in absolutely appalling conditions in northern Kenya, where it's just awful there. It's dry. It's either no rain or it floods. It's hard to grow anything. They're being attacked by Muslim bandits who come across the border from Somalia. Why? I always think all of these heroic African nuns, why are they doing this? Because some woman from Ireland came and brought the faith and created a religious order, and they are now part of that order. They were inspired by this woman from Ireland. So where does race fit into this whole thing? It doesn't. It doesn't. And it doesn't have anything to do with the ethnic identity of the people in any of these countries. Ethnic identity is based on language. That's the simplest definition. That's what it is in the state of nature. We are in a different situation in the United States because we all come from someplace else and we all adopt the English language to get along here. Okay. Right. The difference is it's like, what was the difference between the Goths and other groups? There were so many of them, they did not assimilate.
Right.
That's what Huntington was afraid of in that book called The Hispanic Challenge. Right. I read that book. I gave talks on it when I was in Los Angeles in the 90s, because that's when it came out. I was talking to them about that. The difference is there are so many of you.
Yeah.
And you can drive back to where you visit your grandparents.
And here in California, the place names, Los Angeles, San Diego, like it's impossible to get away from the Hispanic Catholic history. I mean, the missions are still standing. They want to burn them down, but they're still here. So it's impossible for us to get away from that history or that knowledge of ourselves here. It's different.
It's not impossible. And the recipe is sexual liberation.
That's right.
If you corrupt the morals of, especially the women, if you corrupt the morals of the women, they're going to be right. They'll go crazy. And you'll end up like Argentina, where these bare-breasted women want to burn the Catholic Church down because they're obsessed with their sins.
Yes.
And they can't repent. And so therefore they're going to destroy the world that makes them unhappy. That's what's going. It's a very simple recipe. Yeah. These are demonic geniuses who came up with it. It's described in detail in my book, Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control. That's the main threat.
Yeah. And it's happening. It's definitely happening when kind of speaking to you of this cohort of Hispanics in the U.S. males, but the women definitely, you can see it. We call ourselves pochos. It's kind of like the term that Mexicans make for Mexicans from the U.S. They call them pochos, right? So, you kind of have this rise of these pochos here, and the pocha women are, again, especially if they're college educated, like forget it. They hate their Spanish heritage. They hate, this is the typical story. You have a Mexican farmer who lost his farm thanks to NAFTA, comes out here to become a day laborer or join the trades of some sort. He works 2 jobs to be able to support his family, give his children education. His daughter goes to college, comes back with purple hair and hates everything, everything that her father stands for.
Look, this is the Catholic experience. This is not new. Yeah. This is exactly what happens when you go to Notre Dame.
Yeah,
this is and it's worse in a place like Notre Dame because they claim to be Catholic, and then they turn you over into a sex robot and a wage slave. And you find I've gone through generations of Catholic parents saying, what happened here? I sent my child to Notre Dame and now he doesn't go to church anymore. Well, duh, where were you? Why weren't you listening to the people who understood what was going on here? This is clear. Education is dangerous. It's not only is it dangerous, it's a waste of time. The topic, okay, to get back to topic, guess what topic I'm discussing in Nairobi? Is it worth it to get a university education? That's the topic I'm supposed to discuss there.
Sure. It's indoctrination, and it, again, if you take any Latin American studies, and again, who was behind Latin American studies? It was, people involved in the CIA. If you study the history of it and indigenous.
That's exactly what happened in Chile. The CIA took over the Catholic university. The public university said, no, we're not going to let you guys in. The CIA took it over and they turned it into basically the Chicago Boys. Sent Milton Friedman's clones down there to convert Chile to capitalism, and then bring in Jeffrey Sachs and we'll wreck the economy as well. Thanks for nothing. And
to generate the culture. I mean, Chile is one of the vanguard of this, alchemy, of losing, in a sense, the Catholic Hispanic identity and giving into, this capitalist consumerist identity. And there's no surprise that, countries like Chile are at the forefront of feminism and church burning and saint, statues destruction. It's a sad moment down there. But I wanted to highlight a bit, to kind of twist the conversation a bit into logos, because one of the things that I guess has kind of, propelled a lot of my audience to find me is I put forth a way to kind of define, a Hispanic identity in the Americas. The first by three roots. The first root is Cristo Rey, which, is Logos incarnate. It's at the center of our identity. Without it, we don't exist. It's what married our Spanish dad with our Indian mother. Right. And then the second root is our Spanish language, la lengua española, right? It's our paternal root. It's kind of this legacy of what, the Spanish civilization was, which is really the old European Catholic civilization. And the third root being mestizaje, which is our maternal root. And, our second root, the Spanish language, is what makes all the countries in Latin America the same. But our third root, el mestizaje, is what allows us to be different. So, the mestizaje of the Central Mexican Valley is different from the Dominican Republic. It's different from Nicaragua. It's different from Argentina. You had different, mixtures of people in Argentina. You had mixtures between different Europeans, But again, that allows us to be different. The first root allows us to be the same and kind of have some kind of a united cultural, civilizational identity. But again, the first thing is Logos incarnate, is Cristo Rey. So I wanted to ask you, for the audience who's been wrestling with this concept, what is Logos? And what does that have to do with Jesus Christ?
Logos is the Greek word for word. It also, the reason I keep using the word Logos is that it has so many meanings that simply do not get expressed in any other word, in any other language. I learned this when I was studying Greek. You look into the Greek dictionary, it's column after column of words that can be, you have to use all these different words in English just to use that one word. So this is part of the emergence of a consciousness in the world that took place in the 8th century BC, where suddenly people are starting to realize there's an order to the universe. But what is it? And so they first, Thales said it's water, you need water to survive. And then Anaxagoras said it was air, and Heraclitus said it was fire. But Heraclitus started to realize it's not anything material. It's spiritual. It's intellectual. It's a form. It's kind of like a formula. Pythagoras said it was numbers. Well, that comes close because they're really abstract, but that's not what it is. And so they had this centuries-long meditation on this idea of Logos. Like, what does it mean? And then the philosophy reached an impasse where Plato's idea of God didn't fit in with Aristotle's idea of God, and then that just lay fallow. And there were people who were trying to save themselves through Platonism, and suddenly Jesus Christ appeared on this earth. And that was the changing point in history. Okay, the turning point in history. The turning point at that point was you had the Hebrew people who now had a choice, and they chose either Logos as God stood it, or they chose their own fantasies, which is what most of the Jews did. They chose revolutionary fantasies, and that's the story of the Jewish revolutionary spirit.
Yeah.
But at this point, the Jews after Christ, St. Paul, it goes, he only went to synagogues. And at a certain point, the synagogues are going to expel them. Can't talk in synagogues. And he gets a dream, and there's a Greek kind of beckoning from across the Aegean, and he goes to Greece. And he gives a speech at the Areopagus, and it bombs because he gave the wrong speech. He gave the Ephesus speech and talked to them as if they were idol worshipers, and they were philosophers. The Ephesus was full of idol worshipers. That was, and I think the man who knew this was St. John, who was in Ephesus. And so when he wrote his gospel, he had to use the word logos. In the beginning, in arche en ha logos. In the beginning, there was logos, kai logos en prostheon, and logos was with God, kai logos en theos, and logos is God. And at that point, that whole Greek tradition took on a new life, because now it wasn't just a principle, it was a human being. And it was the second person of the Blessed Trinity. And this was a being who could say it, and it happened. Because that's what God does. When he says it, it happens. When you say it, okay, you just said it, so what? But when he says it, it happens. And that's the point of history at that moment. Becomes a more and more refined understanding of Logos. So it's the Trinity, and then they understood that. They finally put that concept together, and then it became a more and more refined understanding of the universe, which became science, and then science went off by itself and turned into anti-logos, which is what we have right now. The COVID lockdown is basically science used as anti-logos, as an authority to beat you over the head.
Right.
At this point, the main manifestation of logos is speech, and that is determinative of your identity. You learn speech from your mother. The Germans call it die Muttersprache, the mother language. You learn speech from your mother. That's where you get your ethnic identity. That's where you get your thought patterns, and that becomes ethnicity. Okay. Now, in a normal situation, like Africa, or let's say the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah.
You've got the Yanomami, okay, and they speak Yanomami, and their word for Yanomamo is the same thing for human being. And the people who live on the other side of the river are known as the scum who eat rattlesnake dung for breakfast.
Right.
That's what Apache means in Navajo, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, that's not going to work. Okay, it's not going to work. You have to have some type of lingua franca here, and that's precisely what the church provided in Europe, because you had all those people in Europe. You didn't have Germany. You had Suevi, and you had Grauthungi, and if it weren't for the Romans, they'd be killing each other.
Right.
And because the church was the vehicle of Logos, and because the church provided this lingua franca, Europe developed in ways that no place ever developed before, and Europe spread out through the entire world to the Americas. And you got either the English version, the Protestant version of Europe, or you got the Catholic Spanish version, but you got Europe at some point or other. And now we have reached the point where you have this kind of global consciousness that is never going to go back again. And we're talking to each other all over the world. So, okay, and we all speak English. That's good. That's good, because we all can speak the same language and talk to each other. But what are we going to talk about? What is it just going to be? I'll take 3 of them, and how much does it cost?
Right.
Or do we have some type of, well, the answer is it's Logos, because there is a philosophical explanation that will allow for the peaceful unification of the entire race based on the fact that we are creatures of Logos. That was the reason I wrote this book, because I've been traveling all around the world to people in all different sorts of circumstances. And I realized what is the fundamental thing that we have to say here? I'm on YouTube and talking to an Indian, and and I said there, Logos died in India. Well, he's upset when he hears that. What do you mean by that? So I tried to explain it to him, and then it came down to, it was the symbol of the cosmos, the Indian symbol of the cosmos. There's the earth is a semicircle. It's sitting on 4 elephants, and 4 elephants are standing on a turtle. So I said to the guy, what's the turtle standing on? And he couldn't answer that question. As a result, he became a Catholic because of that simple type of discussion based on Logos. That's the point that we have reached in the world right now. And it's not a question of either or. The Catholic Church has always been able to allow ethnic identity in combination with some type of universal structure known as the church that will allow all of these different ethnic groups to get along with each other, and yet without losing their identity.
That's right.
Europe is a tribute to that, and now the whole thing is under assault. And the main reason that it's succeeding is because of the American subversion of sexual morality. That's the main form of control that has led us to this point. And I think it's the main thing that's being exposed now. Yes. And I don't want to blow my own horn, but I think I had something to do with this because I was in Poland when the Polish edition of Libido Dominandi came out. I said, if you believe in gay marriage, you're a traitor to the Polish people, and you should be treated as such. And that word got out, and Poland has never given in to gay marriage, and they're heading in the other direction. The fact that they did not give in to gay marriage means that they are now in the forefront of protecting free speech by not allowing deplatforming. This is the type of resistance that you can expect from a Catholic culture, and this is why Catholic cultures are under attack throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you said how the Catholic Church preserved culture, I mean, you saw this in the Spanish Empire. All the Indian languages were preserved. One of the issues that the empire had was that a lot of its soldiers didn't speak Spanish. They spoke Nahuatl and they spoke Quechua, and there was no worse attack on the indigenous groups than came after the republics. The republics selling them the "we're all equal" thing took away all their special rights and privileges.
Right.
The Indians weren't allowed. They had their own court systems. They had their own judicial representative systems. But once the republics came in, all that went away, and all their lands that were protected under the crown were taken away from them. And that's really the big injustice that doesn't even get spoken about. Speaking,
no, that's Whig history.
Yeah,
that's Whig history, and the opposite is the Black legend. So Whig history. When you speak English, the natural tendency is to adopt English forms of thought. And in a sense, I spent my whole life objecting to this because I'm not English.
Because you're Catholic.
I'm Catholic, and I'm Irish and German. And where does the English come in? So I don't have to adopt those thought patterns.
Right.
That's been what I've done.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only sane way, to battle this kind of alchemical beast that sells you pleasure and takes away your autonomy as a human being.
That's right. Right. That's exactly the point.
Yeah, and speaking, to bring it back the conversation a bit into Nicaragua, is that Nicaragua is one of the few countries where abortion's illegal across the board, and even in cases of rape. And there's been cases of clandestine abortion clinics, and the doctors disappeared. Somebody made them disappear. Also, there's no gay marriage or any recognition of that. Though, again, they're trying. And you have countries, like Costa Rica, that just legalized gay marriage. So you also see how they tried a color revolution in 2018, which failed. So, I see it. It's kind of a strange situation, because what's happening in Nicaragua is that the Catholic clergy, who's influential, is that they're actually pushing for feminism. They're actually pushing for this kind of Americanist liberal value ideology. And the socialist commies, the Sandinistas, are the ones being more traditional and conservative.
Yeah, this is happening across the board.
Yeah.
What you had was a redefinition of Marxism.
Yeah.
And it's no longer concerned with economic justice. It's sexual liberation.
Right.
The man who's responsible for this is Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault was a homosexual. He's raised a Catholic. He became a homosexual. That became his identity. He is in rebellion against Logos because he's a homosexual. And he shows up in the United States and suddenly he sees the possibility. Okay. And he makes his pact with the devil, which is basically, if you give me unlimited sexual revolution, I won't ask for a raise. I won't complain about the economic situation. So I have a guy like my buddy David Hawkes, who is a kind of classical Marxist who just wrote a book about anti-logos, in which he's saying basically that the classical Marxists have been pushed aside. They have they've been robbed of their identity. So it'd be interesting to talk about Sandinismo in this regard. You know, we're talking about a couple generations now away from that whole civil war that took place in Nicaragua, and then the kind of reconciliation that followed, which I think was based on Catholic principles.
Totally, 100%, 100%. I mean, the Sandinistas now frame themselves as solidarity, Christianity, and I forget, nationalism or something like that. I mean, it's the Sandinistas of today are more traditional. And then you've had a lot of the clergy, unfortunately, become more of this new wave of Marxists, or at least espouse to that. And I don't know if it's tied to, you know, some of the parishioners, but you see it. I mean, the people who are pushing against the Sandinista regime, and I'm not necessarily Sandinista myself, you know, I do recognize what is done good and I do recognize what's done bad, but you know, you see how it's girls, it's women and girls who I feel like are using Daniel Ortega and the Sandinista as like a scapegoat. And in it, it's like an effigy they want to burn of masculine authority, of the church, of, you know, patriarchy, of all the things that the contemporary Anglo-sized mind or worldview, if you want to call it that, tells us is bad.
Right. Well, look, the problem in the United States is Americanism.
Yes.
It's Americanism. You have the Catholic Church identifying in a very unhealthy way with the American regime as early as the 1890s. That's when this Leo XIII issued his encyclical condemning Americanism. And at that point, it was like, well, you know, democracy and blah, 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 you know. Well, it's gotten much worse. But the point here is that it's as opposed to, let's say, liberation theology.
Yeah.
Okay, where you have a kind of Marxist content that is pretty much frozen in time. And then it became outdated, as you just mentioned, when you have the this neo-left whatever thing, the Foucauldian version of left-wing revolution, which then all focused on sexual issues and left the classical Marxists out in the cold. That's not what happened in America, because these priests, like say the Catholic priests, like the Holy Cross Order at Notre Dame, that's always been a hotbed of Americanism, but it means that they have no static ideology. They just do what the American regime wants. And so in the 50s, it was anti-communism, like pray the rosary to defeat communism. And now it's gender ideology. Whatever the American regime wants, that's what they're doing. And so it becomes a very destructive operation and also hard to pin down.
Yeah.
And you're always finding people who are involved in fighting the battles of the last war. You know, like the classic example being, well, it's communism. No, it's not communism. Right. It's worse than communism. It's an attack on essence. It's a much worse thing because you're attacking the idea of essence when it comes to sexuality, and you're saying, I can be whatever I want to be. And so, so some fat Jew from Pennsylvania can tell us he's a woman, and we're supposed to take it seriously. And then he gets hired to talk to us about health, and we're not allowed to say anything. You know, sorry, I'm not going to go along with that.
Yes, yes. And so, this is kind of like the moment in the road where we're finding ourselves, the crossroads. Where do we want to go?
With Logos. But with
Absolutely.
Logos, and the cutting edge of Logos in human history is the Catholic Church. And it's been that way ever since John wrote his gospel in Greek and adopted the categories of Greek theology, Greek philosophy, and baptized them or redeemed them or brought them up to a higher level. That's what it is now. That's what it is. And so what you saw, just to get back to what I'm talking about in Kenya, okay? So at a certain point, the church created the university to aid itself, aid the church in its mission. And you had something like the University of Paris with St. Thomas Aquinas and so on and so forth. Big help. The Dominicans and the Franciscans, the mendicant orders, great help. But at a certain point, the university became the anti-logos, the vehicle of anti-logos, which is what it is today. Mm-hmm. So don't go. Don't pay to have your children, the morals of your children corrupted, because they're not going to learn what they're supposed to learn anyway, and they won't have debt, and you won't have debt. And so just, do something else. Do something else.
Yeah, and you're seeing that a lot. And again, you see the difference in the sexes. Amongst Hispanic men, you're seeing that college attendance isn't as high. They're going into trades. They're going into unions. They're starting their own businesses. And that's really the bulk of the audience here. So,
that's what happens. In my family, I am the oldest of all of my cousins. And I was talking to the youngest of all of my cousins. And he said, I and his brother, his oldest brother, went into academia. And suddenly we realized, hey, we're not welcome. And so he never tried it. And he went to Wall Street and he made a ton of money, a lot more money than I ever made.
Right.
But the other point was that these guys all migrated to things like computers, and then computers got really big. And so it's a powerful force that will show up because they're blocked from certain things. So people like me, well, I was kicked out of academia 40 years ago. Right. You think it's gotten better?
Right.
But as I've said many times, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I wouldn't be talking to you right now about books like Logos Rising if I had stayed in academia, because I couldn't do it. You can't do that. You cannot talk about Logos in academia. I guarantee you cannot.
Right. I have a couple questions for you, Dr. Jones, that some of the audience sent in. Let me ask you, do you have any recommendations? And I think you've touched on it, but do you have any specific recommendations for young Hispanos growing up in the U.S. who want to best retain our religion and our ethnic identity instead of becoming Americans?
Yes, the Catholic Church, a parish. You have the advantage of the ethnic parish, the ethnic neighborhood.
Yes,
you have that advantage. That was what was destroyed in places like Chicago. The blacks were used as proxy warriors to come up and drive those people out of their neighborhoods and turn them into white people who lived in the suburbs and watched television. You can learn from that and realize that solidarity means shared experience in a local community speaking the same language. That's the key to preserving your ethnic identity, and you have all of the wherewithal. All you have to do is make sure that you keep your children away from the toxic culture, which is not as easy. It was easy for me because all I said was, okay, I'm never going to have a television. And 40 years ago or 50 years ago, that was simple. Just don't bring the television. Now you have to have a computer. Now your computer is full of pornography. It's much more difficult, but you have to do that. And the main way you can do that is through local community. So just to get personal here, my youngest three children were homeschooled, but they all after homeschooling, they could go to the ballet. And it was a good outlet. It was local people, it was a cultural thing. It was exercise. It was a really good idea. And it helped them get through that difficult adolescent period. That's the type of thing I'm recommending. I said this to a group of people in Cincinnati. They were coming to a Latin mass at Old St. Mary's and Over the Rhine, which used to be a German neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I said, look, you're not a community. You come from a 50-mile radius to go to a Latin mass, and then you all go back home. And that's not a community. That's a club. And the club is like, stamp collectors. I mean, it's nice to have a club, but it's not a community. You have to move into this community. Well, they were afraid. They were afraid because everyone there had some type of horror story about Black migration. Like my grandfather got robbed and somebody did this, that, and the other thing. I said, well, yeah, okay, that's life. Fear is useless. What is needed is love. But they didn't listen to me. And now you can't do it because it's been gentrified. You could have gotten in 30 years ago. They could have gotten in on the ground floor, brought up property, fixed it up, and they'd all be millionaires now because of the property. But they didn't do it because of fear. Right. Fear is useless. What is needed is love. So I just in one instance, I was there. We went to the fireworks display. It was like Mogadishu and Black Hawk Down. There wasn't enough room in the van, so I had to walk through over the Rhine in the dark. And there are all these Black people hanging out. And I'm talking to my son about urban renewal. And I suddenly realized this Black woman's walking next to me, making fun of me. So I said to her, are you an expert on urban renewal? And she said to me, no. Are you? And I said, yeah, I am. And the other woman said, you are? And then we had a conversation that we never would have had if we hadn't been on the sidewalk together. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? This is absolutely crucial. You have to have a community of shared geographical space, and it's got to have some type of focus. And that is why the Catholic Church is there, to provide the values that will focus the community.
Do you have any recommendations for us on how to kind of, I guess, gain more influence within, like, how do we do that? Do we found monasteries? Do we create seminaries? How do we, say, hey, we need a church here? The parish around here is ran a certain way, and there's very little influence that, I'll be able to have. Do we need to start new churches and get new clergy? There's a generational challenge here.
Everything changes. Everything changes over time. It doesn't seem to, but it does. The main issue is unity. And we're in a crisis situation now, largely because of Catholic-Jewish dialogue. The Jews have divided the Catholic community. Yeah. And they now have veto power of who gets named to be a saint. And it's just a terrible situation. You can't have good relations with the Jews and have unity in the Catholic Church. That's one example. You have to have some type of unity of mind and heart, which means you have to follow the gospel, and the priest has to proclaim the gospel. If the priest is proclaiming the gospel according to America Magazine, according to James Martin, according to any other these people, he's not proclaiming the gospel, and you're going to have disunity. So, I mean, I don't know your situation now. I mean, no. You say there are lots of Hispanic people in California now. Well, that means they're going to have their own ethnic neighborhoods, which means and that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because ethnos needs logos. Right. If you just have an ethnic neighborhood and everybody's watching television, they're all, or whatever it is now, right, you're all going to end up hating each other, and you're all going to be fighting each other, and you're all going to be clawing your way up the greasy pole of ambition, trying to buy more and more so you can get your way out of the neighborhood and live by yourself in the suburbs. That's the type of consciousness you have to fight, because it's anti-Catholic.
Thank you. One last question here, Dr. Jones. Somebody asked, do you see a connection between sodomy and mask enforcements? It seems like there's they feel
sodomy and mask enforcement.
It seems like they feel deputized to enforce the mandate. Somebody asked.
Only in the sense that we're talking about preferred behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So the homosexual, did a talk on this about 20 years ago about why the homosexual is the ideal citizen. The government is promoting the homosexual because it fits in with the oligarchs' view of the world. So they don't have children. They're controlled by their passions. They're easy to manipulate, and all of these things. The mask is a sign that you're going along with this COVID charade. Right. I think there is a virus out there. I think I got it. It was like a bad cold. I got over it in a couple of days, and now I'm immune. So what difference does the mask make now? Everyone's waiting for this to be shut down. Everyone's waiting for representative government to take control and take the reins of power out of the hands of Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci. Nobody elected these people. And they are running the country now. And at a certain point, we're all going to have to get together and say, we're not going to take it anymore. Okay. We're just going to go about our business. We're not going to be run in fear. That's the only connection that I can see. They're both forms of control.
Yeah.
And nobody can see them as such. Although I think a lot of people are starting to see the COVID thing. It's becoming more and more obvious that that's simply a form of control. And if you wear the mask, you're showing that you're following the regime's instructions, and therefore you're a good person, and the other people are bad people. And that's the type of mentality it's supposed to generate. But I think people are just getting tired of it. At a certain point, look, the fundamental crisis right now is representative government. Do we have representative government, or do the people just take money from rich sources of donors and then do their bidding as soon as they get people to pull the lever and put them in office? That's a worldwide crisis right now. Something we got to deal with.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for your time and blessing here the show. My audience is a huge fan, and there's probably guys who haven't heard of you, and hopefully this will make them go down the E. Michael Jones rabbit hole. It's a good rabbit hole, I assure you guys.
Go culturewars.com. You'll get to see all my books are available on culturewars.com.
Right. And Logos Rising is your newest book.
Latest book, yes.
And it seems to me like everything's been culminating towards that book.
In my life, certainly. Yes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm going to order it. I'm going to have to read it, and I'm going to have to bring you back, and hopefully we can expand on everything you touch on there.
That's right. I'd be happy to do that.
I'm working on Barren Metal. It's quite a beefy book.
God bless you. God bless you. I should give out gold stars for people who can read Barren Metal.
I have it right here. It's a beefy book. There's a lot to digest in it, but I'm working on it. Well, thank you, Dr. Jones. God bless you as well. And I hope you have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
El lagrimiar de las cumaraguas está cubriendo toda mi tierra. Piden la vida y le dan un siglo, pero con tal que no pase nada en mi tierra mansa, mi mansa tierra. Yo sé que un día tuviste sueños, no viste un río cuando pequeño, pero tu alma se te alegraba con la llegada del vendaval. Huellas cansadas tienen tus pasos, pero aunque el río sea muy manso, poquito a poco se enfrenta al mar. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, llena de gritos el cardonal. Hay semerucos allá en el cerro y un canto hermoso para cantar. Que semerucos allá en el cerro y ya la gente empezó a sembrar. A veces pienso que todo el pueblo es un muchacho que va corriendo tras la esperanza que se le va. La sangre joven y el sueño viejo, pero dejando de ser pendejo, esa esperanza será verdad. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, llena de gritos el cardonal. Que hay semerucos allá en el cerro y un canto hermoso para cantar. Que semerucos allá en el cerro y ya la gente empezó a sembrar. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, que el pueblo manso ya esmondarás. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, llena de gritos el cardonal. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial. Los zapamates ya se vistieron como en Cuaresma los nazarenos. Dulce mejilla la de mi pueblo, ya la segunda le está doliendo a mi pueblo manso, mi manso pueblo, vuelve a tu canto de turpial, llena de gritos el cardonal. Que hay semerucos allá en el cerro y un canto hermoso para cantar. Que hay semerucos allá en el cerro y ya la gente empezó a sembrar. Sol colorado, viento del este, se abren los brazos del gran durmiente, que al chivo manso siempre lo arrean, que eso no pasa si es montarás, que al chivo manso siempre lo arrean, que eso no pasa si es montarás. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, que el pueblo manso ya es montarás. Vuelve a tu canto de turpial, que el pueblo